so I probably won't ask this exactly right. But, John, you talk about education being an input that would make one think that there would be a greater percentage of folks with good jobs. And I guess my question is, why would we think that? Why wouldn't we equally think that we may have just very highly educated Walmart readers? I mean, doesn't a lot of this have to do with the jobs our economy is producing and not just, you know, not necessarily a good match between the educational levels and the jobs that are available? And I guess the reason I'm sort of concerned about this is not only because obviously we want to see more good jobs created, and not just people qualified to take them if they exist, but also it seems like a lot of folks keep sort of repeating a mantra that all we need to do is get better training, better education for the workforce, and things will be okay. And it seems to me, if anything, your analysis indicates that that may not be a very effective strategy. So I would be interested, I guess, in hearing both of you comment on that.
Can you hit that 2 more times? That's it. The question, I'm going to just have to make some assertions rather than go into depth, but the issue about what kind of jobs people are getting is something that I try to address because I was concerned in the same way that you are. We are putting out all these college-educated people, number one. Number two, they're making relatively more money, so it's unlikely, actually, that they're just in poor-level jobs, which begs the question, then, what are they going into? And in '95, I created an ad hoc set of criteria. I said, I like ad hocisms. You just have to be careful how you do it and how you use them. And I looked at office and business administration and finance and insurance. And in other words, I took out the front offices of things, and I was able to show that a lot of the growth, and especially where all the college-educated people went into, was this mid-level business things. They went into high-level sales reps, not sales. The company-to-company sales reps. They went into middle management. They went into all of these firms. And it's just a lot bigger than any of us think. And if we open our eyes around us, what we might see is office buildings downtown and office parks in suburbs. It really does employ a lot of people, and in my analysis, again, I can't really defend this, is you see the declining of manufacturing, and when I mean declining of manufacturing, I'm talking about really manual workers. So the office workers are taken out, so manual workers in manufacturing, construction, utilities. And just very briefly, that the share of the mixed jobs of low skilled services, surprise to me, is basically been constant over the period. So there clearly has been a change in how America has organized the distribution of rewards. And money, much more of it went to the top third, and the bargaining power, I would argue, meant that the middle kind of just went a little sideways and didn't improve as much as they could have, and the real pain is concentrated in lower levels of the position, and that would be something. So I think what we do see is that we just have, that people have misinterpreted the service economy, and there are a lot more high-level jobs out there than we realize. And getting back to your other question, on some of the low-level, on some of the medium-skill and low-level jobs, people with more education are making more than people with less education. So there's always that gradient, but you would have thought that they would have made more. Such that, there's two kinds of things that are happening. There's the changes in job slots, and there's the changes of pay within job slots. And then there's the allocation of workers at different levels of education into the various job slots and into the various pay within job slots. So there are all these things that are coming together, and that what you see is that people clearly have higher educational credentials, and people with more credentials get more than people with less credentials. So it's always a better strategy to slightly have more, but they aren't, it's not, that doesn't mean that a lot of people other than high school has made big gains since decades ago.
Steve, can I just ask you a quick question on the lines? Which is the yellow line, which is the purple in this correspondence?
Yeah, fine. I call this a functional distribution because what I did is I went into occupation industry cells and I allocated each occupation industry cell. So you're talking about ad hocism. I made a lot of choices here. And, I'll argue why. So there are 5 sectors. Office work was always fairly large, even in 1960. And then it went up and then it flattened out. The purple line is health and education, high skill services. Not counting the office function within high skill services. And that went up a lot. This teal line, I'm a high class guy. I read all this home and gardening stuff. The teal light blue line, I couldn't resist. Is down a whole lot. And this line, which
I think that's chartreuse.
Chartreuse, yes. This actually should be there. The yellow line is low skill services.
Okay.
That's the big job. That's retail workers and fast food and personal services, etc.
I think that the question about education is a really incredibly important one. When I say we would expect to see big increases in good jobs because we have more college-educated workers and we have far fewer or less high school-educated workers, I'm really sort of inhabiting the world of economics, where economists learn to increase skills, increase the supply of skills, that increases the productivity of workers. Workers get their marginal product, therefore they're going to do just fine. And so what I'm doing is I'm saying, to the extent that we believe the things that we believe in general about this economy, then we should have expected to see big increases. I'm actually very skeptical about the role at a policy level of education. Again, going back to the idea of Thanksgiving dinner, if my niece asks me, should I go to college or should I not go to college? I'm going to say, go to college, or I'm going to track you down wherever you are and make you go. But that doesn't mean necessarily that that's a personal issue that makes a very big difference. But from if everybody goes to college, then the competitive edge of college is less and things like that. But the point that I want to make is we have had the largest increase in educational attainment probably in the history of the United States, and one not only that is the largest in history, but probably impossible to ever reproduce. Because we had 2 things happen. We had this huge increase in educational attainment among young people, and those young people happen to be baby boomers. So it's a big generation relative to what came before and after. Their parents were much less educated than they were, so there was this huge transition. So we went from having a very high share of people with less than high school education and a low share of people with college degrees over the course of 25 or 30 years to almost the opposite. We're never going to be able to do that again. We couldn't spend the kind of money, given the demographics we have now, to do the next kind of increase in college education or get rid of the kind of lower the less than high school educated workers. Despite that huge increase in educational attainment, we've got the results we've had here. Big increases in inequality, stagnating wages for men in the middle, and the very poor performance in terms of the good jobs index that we use. I think for me, the key issue is that education simply isn't enough. We absolutely positively have to do it, but we have to do things that restore bargaining power so that people who have middle level and upper level of education and even lower levels of education have the kinds of bargaining power that they need to prevail in discussions with their employers. And I just want to make that point with respect to, this one last point with respect to Steve's graph here, because I think it goes to the point that an office or administration job that you might have had in 1960 or 1970 probably was socially a very different thing than having an office or administration job today. And that's the point I'm trying to make. It doesn't mean that you suddenly have health insurance and a pension. Now it means you're in a call center, or maybe not, that's not an office. Okay. What we know is that the share of people who have health insurance and pensions has fallen as this transition is taking place. So this is not a complete guarantee of any improvement in job quality. It just says people look like they have jobs that would have been good in the past. That's all.
Can I add one more thing? Dina wanted us to know that, because both Dina I separately came up with trying to disaggregate where the growth went. And it's a difficult thing, but there's a lot going on now that there's these papers by two economists named Pickney and Sace, the IRS data. And there's a line going on now that the growth really went to the top 1% or the top 5% or the top 10%. And one of the quotes I said, all the growth went to the top 10%. I don't believe that. I'll just say it. I could argue it further, but since I'm talking, let me just say what I do think. I do think that that there's a lot of people that the housing market may have been crazy, but there are a lot of people that could pass the test in the past, not the subprime. And then all these suburbs, all these places in Fairfax, Montgomery, et cetera, aren't just a Washington phenomenon. And I would think that we really should think about a really broad upper middle class of a lot of people making over, having households where they make $100,000 a year annually. And I think the winners, I would argue the winners of this economy is more closely recorded than the people who have lived well, not 1 or 5%. I think that politically that makes a big difference. And I then argue differently about what happened in the next half. And I don't think they haven't gotten their fair share, but I would argue that they haven't been staying. Working more. Thank you.
Steve, you won't get me talking about the housing loan, but I will say, but one of the things that, as Steve and I went back and forth on this, I think we agree on, is that it's actually striking. There's been relatively little redistribution from wages to profits. So, to my mind, the villains in this story are high-end earners, which are, corporate executives, the Wall Street crew, doctors, lawyers. But the increase in profit share is actually very minor, and I think actually from the 90s to the current decade, I'd say the profit share fell. Obviously, we're still in this kind of cycle, but I should say that it fell.
It's up. I'm just going to say the opposite. For the profit share went in a narrow band from 70 to 2000, and then it went up from 2000
cyclical.
to...
Cyclical peaks. Cyclical peaks. The cyclical peak of this cycle.
I would agree more with you.
Another topic.
Yeah, I just want to, address this issue of spin, and I guess that's what I would call it in terms. John put it out at the beginning is, what would you expect to happen? And I think that's really what it comes down to, because obviously your data, the charts you show don't really contradict what John showed. I think there is a case that people should be even more angry than they are, and more negative, which they're getting more negative, especially right now. First of all, other data, you can compare productivity to wage growth, right? So you can take Dean's, usable productivity measure, where, it's uses, instead of the non-farm business sector, use the whole economy, adjust for the increase in depreciation. It's 48% increase in productivity, and what, 9% increase in wages, depending on
9 for the median wage compensation, 20%.
Yeah. So that's something I think it's reasonable to expect that everybody shares, right? The other thing, and then the other thing that paper shows is that there's been a vast slowdown in productivity growth as well, if you use that measure. If productivity, usable productivity had grown as fast as it did from 47 to 73, it would have grown 169% instead of 48%. So the economy's failed in another dimension, besides the one that people, the left, that you're kind of making fun of, is talking about. It's failed perhaps less in that dimension, but also in that. And then I guess the final thing is just the very idea that people should have to make, anybody really, this country should make less after, in a richer society, that we can't afford, because you hear from Thomas Friedman every week, we can't afford the kind of wages we used to have in 1979 because we're in a global economy. That's what I think makes no economic sense. This is what we're being sold, and I think that's the progressive community's reaction to that, which is pretty widely accepted and is really used as an excuse. And I did hear you say that, but I think there was a little bit of that hint in it when you were talking about how, during that period of some manufacturing workers, they got wages that were maybe higher than they would be in a competitive market or something like that, like this kind of adjustment took place. And I would not call that, I would call that a redistribution of income and something that really people should be pretty angry about.
I'll just make 2 sentences. They're not. We've been saying people should be angry for a long time. And I guess in 1987, I said, I got quoted in the radical economists are part of this organization called the Union for Radical Local Economics. The summer conference, a Times reporter was there and quoted me saying, after 16 years, that means going back to 1971, I'm tired of making apocalyptic statements. And, I've been out there trying to make the social change that most people in this room think is the appropriate social change, and finding that people didn't exactly buy our message in 1971, 1975, 1980, 1995. I was forced to say, well, maybe we have to figure out why. And I think that we have been expert at putting together the set of numbers that shows the negative case and less expert at some of the other balance that shows why people aren't buying our line. I'll be very honest. I come out of that tradition, and I was just driven by asking the question of why haven't people bought our line? And they haven't. So I think there's an economic argument there that shows that people aren't really ridiculously stupid by not deciding that they should all be liberal Democrats. That's my goal in my course. It's a very simple goal of mine. Because I deal with liberal Democrats, and all they say is, people are really stupid! And I've heard them say that for 30, I got involved in the left in 1967. So, I got a little tired of saying, people are really stupid because they're not with me. I could only say that for 20 years. without trying to at least intellectually face the option that they weren't stupid and maybe I was wrong.
I'm Tom Powell. I'm with Progressive Democrats of America. I missed the presentation. But just to jump into this little part right here, I think that now we're into the social psychological as opposed to the economic analysis and political, why people get upset. I would just make the argument, or why they don't get upset. I would just simply make the argument that when people know that they can get upset and make a change that would be positive, they get upset. When they think that getting upset, if they get upset they can't make a change that would make positive, they tend to just don't vote and don't get upset. And that's sort of, I think, the environment we're in right now. We have people that aren't, less and less people vote. I would just, my feeling is this mostly has to do with the fall of the Soviet Union and the fact that when, the Soviet Union fell, suddenly every multinational corporation throughout the world didn't have to worry about their investments being nationalized in the developed world, and it opened up all these cheap labor markets. And, the argument for NAFTA was, hey, if we don't, do that, if we don't open up Mexico, Europe's going to do it, so we better jump on that. And that's been the impetus, in the last almost 20 years now. And I saw, comparing now to 40 years ago or 30 years ago, I think it's irrelevant. I think, again, if people felt like in this new global economy there was something they could get angry about and make a change in this new global economy, and felt there was a way that they could effectively make change, they would do that. But they don't see a solution to
I just want to not directly comment on what you just said, but the issue of now that we're talking about the politics, I want to at least chime in a little bit on my own view of this. And one, I think that this is actually not going to be that much about politics. But what's interesting to me is, having been a careful reader of Steve since I was this big.
That just means I'm this old.
One of the things that is interesting to me about the discussion today is that I think it's interesting for me to hear you say, Steve, that you think about a quarter of the folks in the economy are sort of the winners. And then you're saying something like a third to maybe a half right below them aren't getting their fair share. and then maybe a quarter or a third are really kind of getting left behind. And I actually think that that's not terribly different from the idea that 80% of people have been kind of left behind in the economy and 20% are doing pretty well. I don't quite understand what we're having this whole huge argument about.
Oh, I disagree. No. The issue is the middle. The issue is what's enough. I mean, I would argue, in my humble opinion, as we say online, that in my reading of the politics of the American middle class, that it's enough. That what I would argue is that the bottom quarter are the ones that are left behind and hurting and not happy campers. In the middle, what?
And they don't vote anymore.
Even if they voted, there's no indication that the non-voters would shift elections. I hate to tell you, we really have no data that when you increase, we have all these side arguments too, let alone the main ones. But I think that in the paper that I did at ITIF, I argued that the median should be adjusted for the adjustments I made in long discussion, 33%. It should have been up for, the fair share would have been 48%. I think that people have accepted that the wonders of the high consumer society, and they think they're getting enough of it. So I would put those middle 50 toward, I want to be up top. And so I don't put the middle 50 with the bottom 25, I put them closer to the
Okay, I think we've got time for the two more questions in the back. But first, I just want to make a quick comment about the NAFTA story. That you should beat people up when they say that for a simple reason that if you want to buy the orthodox trade
It's not
theory,
advocating violence.
I'm not advocating violence.
Yeah.
If you want to buy the orthodox trade theory, you can say, okay, it's better that we break off our barriers to Mexico so we can open up trade between us and Mexico. But if you envision, let's say we don't do that, we envision two alternative universes. One is that the Europeans and Japanese come into Mexico and they have all this trade, and then the other one where they also have all these barriers, so they don't do it either. In standard economic theory, we're better off in the world where they're doing it, where Europe and Japan are coming to Mexico, making Mexico richer. We're better off in that world. So when they're saying they're going to get there if we don't, well, we should go, well, that's good. That's an argument against NAFTA, but that's not an argument for it. That just shows they don't know the trade there.
And I wasn't making an argument.
No, I know. I'm just telling you because I've heard that argument
made. Well, that was the argument that was made.
It's made all the time. I'm just saying it's a bogus argument. It's anyhow. Okay, so one over here, gentlemen.
My point was just on the point you made, which was I wonder if part of the explanation, I posit the explanation for why there aren't more people who agree is neither that they are ignorant, nor that the economics that they're experiencing wouldn't merit some reaction, but rather that they have been, that basically we have been out-messaged, out-framed, and that there has been such a sort of social psychology or psychology trick of disempowerment that we contribute to by how we frame our arguments, which is to say not so much that the economic data merits people saying, oh, I'm actually happy, I don't actually want change, but rather, often when we make the critique, and I do this all the time, we don't connect immediately to it the empowering solutions. So we lay out doom and gloom, doom and doom, doom and doom, sucks, and then we say, see, we proved it, as compared to doom and gloom, but this is your alternative and here's how you get there. And it sucks, however, here's an alternative and what you can do. And it gets to some of the Lakoff stuff about how when you scare someone, the 1-to-3 ratio, 1 scared to 3 positives, where you just make people want to take the first act of problem to bed. And so I wonder if part of it is a messaging problem amongst progressives as compared to the economics. Because the data that shows that 70% of Americans who don't have college degrees at this point are zooming into the net loser scenario in the globalized economy, in that the income losses that they're seeing by merit of global competition relative to the lower prices of things they purchase thanks to global competition is starting to net out negative. It's the whole Samuelson article from 3 years ago issue. And at that point, you have data like that, that is a psychology problem or is it really an economics issue?
I'll just answer in 2 sentences. A, I think the gains are more substantial than negative or small. to the people in the middle, and again, I've said it before, so I'll repeat it, and B, I find it hard to believe that the other side is smart and we're stupid in messaging. It's just an Occam's razor kind of thing that I just don't believe that they're better at messaging than we're not. There's no reason for that. I think there's a reason for that. I think that people have bought in. I mean, in my mind, it's very simple. And Kuttner says it clearly. If you've got our politics, we've got to spend hundreds of billions of dollars. He said 1 trillion at one point. I actually think that was too high. Hundreds of billions of dollars, as in 5 to 700 extra social safety net and investment spending. And we're going to have to raise that money by taxing the top 25% for it. And no politician will ever say that because they'll get killed. And as that doesn't change, then that gets our politics. And if you think I'm wrong and no politician will say that, or you think you're wrong and they'll get killed, then we disagree. But I would argue that if you really had our politics and couldn't put it out, you would say the following statement: we need $500 billion more on social investment and social safety net programs, and we're going to get it by taxing the people who really made out like bandits over the last 30 years. That top 25%. We're really going to not just get the top 25%, but we're really going to go back, and some people say, getting the top 1%, and we're really going to get back to the days when there was a 91% marginal rate or 70% effective rate. And no one's saying it.
Well, we couldn't say it that way, that's the point.
Oh, we couldn't say it anyway. That's the point.
No, but the notion that the right wing gets away with the notion that, I call it the death tax, the notion that the richest of the rich shouldn't have a redistributive tax on their inheritance, and they blow that up when it affects 3% of the population on the margin by calling it the death tax, actually does show how they out-message us left and right. Because that's a totally, unbelievably knuckle-dragging, unsupportable, idiotic thing to be able to win on. So if they can pull off that shit, the fact that we can't do getting more social spending by increasing taxes because we don't frame it right and do the education of why it's in people's interest to do so, is at least, maybe it's not we're all idiots and they're all smart, but it does show we have some messaging work to do.
I would say the following from social psychological research. 70% of people think they'll be in the top 10%. So we know that people have unrealistic expectations of what they can become.
They used to. As you know, all that data that was done after the last election, including the exit polling, but then the big poll, the big data that was done out of the University of Michigan, and that stage poll they do in election shows that for the first time in this cycle, people thought that their kids' future was
It's a different statement of what I said. And I'm getting the other polls.
Okay, let me let John respond. But let me just throw in one tidbit on the inheritance tax. There is some solid evidence that an awful lot of people think they will be subject to it, who are not subject to it. And David K. Johnson did the most interesting piece I've seen on this in the report over the time. He actually found small business owners who got insurance policies that were supposed to cover their inheritance tax if they died young, people who would owe zero. So they were actually paying out money. This wasn't just expressing, opinion to a pollster. They were paying out dollars from their pocket for nothing. So we do know people were confused at that.
Just on the issue of framing.
Yeah.
Okay. I think, I'm actually intrigued by Steve's comments, and it's making me stop and think about Occam's razor and how can we be so stupid, and they're not. Unfortunately, I'm still working against a lot of examples of how stupid we've been. But let me just take it one extra level, and that is, it's not just a question of framing. I think it's also a question of organizing, right? And I think they're
And how many TV stations do you own?
But I think we've been completely out-organized, and the circumstances facing the labor movement for the last 40 years have made a big difference to our political situation. And other kinds of organizing, just kind of old-fashioned organizing in churches and the stuff that the right has done is an area where we've really fallen behind. And we have a lot of good ideas, and there's plenty of smart people in D.C., but it's never going to go anywhere until we have some work on it.
Okay, last question.
In response to the general question, like why haven't people gotten angrier? I think some of the responses and comments around them kind of alluded to it. But it's the whole consumption thing. People might be making marginally more, marginally less money, but like, you know, they can consume all sorts of products that weren't available back in '79. I mean, everyone in this room has a cell phone. You know, I mean, could you get, you know, they weren't available in 1979. I mean, you know, there's cable with like 500 channels. You know, PlayStation 3, Xbox 360. You know, and also like, you know, I think American homes tend to be a lot or larger than like the homes in Europe. There's a lot of the basic like quality of life measures by which, you know, we are sort of outdoing the Europeans on average, and that isn't captured in graphs and charts like this. And so, you know, if you take the average person today and you show them this chart, and, you know, they got like, you know, they got their cell phone with like the, you know, Britney Spears ringtone or whatever, and they got like their SUV in the parking lot, and you know, all of this. I mean, you know, they might look at it and be like, you know what, I don't care. I'm good, so I don't care. At the end of the day, that's what it comes down to.
Well, we'll just have to toss in on this one. Some of the European countries actually have higher rates of cell phone usage and broadband penetration than, I can't speak to that, penetration of the United States. So at least on that score, you know, it's not good that they're doing worse. They're doing
Yeah,
better.
but the point is well taken.
Yeah.
We have bigger
We have-
cars, we have bigger houses, you know, yeah. And I think it goes to a little bit the difficulty of trying to get our message through. You know, someone sitting in front of the Xbox all day is not going to necessarily be listening to, you know, what our proposals for, you know, health insurance or whatever other issue.
Any last words? Okay, well, I thank everyone for coming, and I thank Steve and John. Very good presentations, very good back and forth. And we'll all agree on this, right?
I'll make it for it.